Okay, before we start the video, there's just a bit of a disclaimer. We will be discussing serious mental health topics and the means by which a few of those are diagnosed. If you feel that yourself or anyone else that you know can relate at all with any of the topics discussed, and I mean seriously relate, I implore you to seek the professional help you need. There are links to resources down below. Also, I am not in any way, shape, or form a mental health professional. I have no degree stating as such, and my experience is limited to that of what I could find on the internet through reputable sources. I've only put research into these things as they've pertained to cyberpunk and the topic of cyberpsychosis. Therefore, some things will be left undefined as they don't pertain to the topics stated. Now please, sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy the video. Oh, also, minor spoilers for Cyberpunk Edgerunners. The Ship of Theseus paradox, a thought experiment on whether or not an object can retain its identity when all parts have gradually been replaced over time. It goes something like this. The ship of the mythical hero Theseus has been recovered by a museum. To preserve the ship as long as possible, planks that have rotted away are replaced by newer, heat-treated and chemically treated planks of wood. At what point does the ship on display stop being the Ship of Theseus and become an updated replica? The easy answer is once all the wood is replaced. But can you place an exact percentage on when the ship stops being the ship? At 99%, does the ship stop being the ship, or does that remaining 1% continue carrying the name Ship of Theseus? Now let's shift to a more futuristic scenario. Let's enter a basic man named David. David has a near fully organic body in a city where nearly everyone has some form of bodily modifications, most times getting their first modification in high school. He is moderately fit, moderately athletic, and moderately intelligent, but his lack of modifications end up being more of a hindrance. Most of his peers can run faster for longer, having modified lungs or enhanced prosthetic legs to carry them further, with little to no fatigue. Others still can download martial arts training programs and the muscle memory to perform the punches and kicks that would take David years to master. Coupled with the death of his mother, David decides he can't deal with it anymore and installs his first piece of cyberware. Little does he know, that choice would be his undoing. Don't worry, we won't be jumping into a long dissertation on transhumanism. I don't have the confidence to be able to discuss that. At least not without getting lost in pseudo-intellectual jargon and coming off pretentious. So, no, today we'll be looking at the cusp. The point where David stops being David and looks at the edge of becoming, well, something else entirely. We'll be looking at that 1%. Today we're discussing cyberpsychosis, both from a roleplay standpoint and from the standpoint of the rules as outlined in Cyberpunk Red, in hopes that you may be able to take to the table the mindset of someone on the edge of cyberpsychosis. I think we should start with a question. What exactly is cyberpsychosis? To answer that, we need to look specifically at a passage on page 230, aptly titled Cyberpsychosis, which first defines humanity loss. Trust me, the two go hand in hand. Humanity loss is defined for this purpose as a loss of empathy for others and a corresponding loss of self-regard or sense of self-preservation. Subjects with low humanity have trouble emphasizing with themselves or others as real. Instead, they start to see themselves or others as a collection of parts instead of living, breathing organisms. This is basically a form of dissociative disorder. According to the Mayo Clinic, dissociation is a mental process of disconnecting from one's thoughts, feelings, memories, or sense of identity. The dissociation disorders that need professional treatment include dissociative amnesia, dissociative fugu, depersonalization disorder, and dissociative identity disorder. Traumatic events that occur during adulthood may also cause dissociative disorders. Such events may include war, torture, or living through a natural disaster. Living in Night City, the average citizen is subject to constant traumatic scenes on a daily basis. So the development and subsequent cultivation of an identity disorder is almost commonplace. Constantly bearing witness to acts of gang violence and police brutality without any sort of repercussion is the norm. And no, I'm not diverting away from the legitimacy of these crimes in the real world either. Things outside the confines of cyberpunk are, well, that's an entirely different topic. What I'm saying is that criminals don't have to fear consequences because the system is so broken that anyone with a little scratch can dodge crimes of the worst variety, leading to a blatant disregard of what constitutes proper litigation. NCPD is buried so far in paperwork and red tape because the corruption is so rampant that it is significantly less paperwork to just shoot an alleged perpetrator than it is to actually investigate a crime, which is why merc work is so in demand. It's easier to make money as an edge runner or a ganger than it is to work a corporate 9-to-5, though 9-to-5 jobs actually end up being 16-hour ordeals. This all becomes a breeding ground for the type of trauma that leads to the development of a dissociative disorder early on. And for edge runners whose job it is to take gigs varying from violent crimes to major heists, chroming up can push them dangerously close to cyberpsychosis. The next passage then specifically defines depersonalization disorder as such. Depersonalization disorder is characterized by feeling detached from one's life, thoughts, and feelings. People with this type of disorder say they feel distant and emotionally unconnected to themselves, as if they are watching a character in a boring movie. Other typical symptoms include problems with concentration and memory. The person may report feeling spacey or out of control. Time may slow down. They may perceive their body to be a different shape or size than usual, and in severe cases, they cannot recognize themselves in a mirror. To help outline how cyberpsychosis differs from standard humanity loss, the passage "How Cyberware Fits In" is necessary. It reads, "Developing cyberpsychosis is not triggered merely by putting in cyberware. It is the voluntary removal of a functioning body part to replace it with a machine. It is generally not normal to voluntarily cut off a limb or remove a functioning body part. Putting in an earring involves some self-harm, but on a level that is barely discernible to the person doing it. It also does not require the removal of a body part. However, voluntarily choosing to replace a working part for no other reason than aesthetic or functional advantage requires that the user already be able to get past the qualms of cutting up one's body voluntarily. Cyberpsychosis comes about when the subject begins to compulsively alter the body beyond the human baseline. Seeing the body as a thing, a form of dissociative personality disorder, they change it without thought. Why this doesn't count for people who have non-voluntarily needed cyberware. Replacing a lost or damaged body part with a new cloned part or a medical grade cyberware. Only €50 to purchase separately, cost is included in the cost of a hospital visit, in the rare circumstances when a cloned limb isn't available. Will not increase dissociation. This is because the replacement of the body part makes the person feel whole again, increasing their level of body awareness. Now, if they replace that limb with a cyberarm with knives in the knuckles, that choice was voluntary because it was an excessive augmentation, and will thus come with humanity loss. This can also circle us back to the Ship of Theseus analogy. How much augmentation does David take on before David is no longer David? In the case of cyberpunk edge runners, characters who undergo cyberpsychosis end up reliving points in their memories when they were the most human, trying to retain those pieces threatening to disappear. In David's case, when his mother was alive and they shared the goal of reaching Arasaka Tower's top floor. And in Main's case, when he was training for his first boxing matches, the symbolism being him running through the desert. Keep that in mind as we move to page 232 and look at the effects of cyberpsychosis. The first paragraph states, cyberpsychosis is not always necessarily violent. Not all cyberpsychos are violent. However, a number of cases, particularly those who have already manifested psychopathological or sociopathic tendencies, will find those tendencies magnified to a dangerous extent. Specifically, their view of others as things to be used or harmed without thought or empathy increases dramatically. He then includes the elements of psychopathy from the Hare Psychopathy checklist, which will be used when discussing the rules of cyberpsychosis here in a moment. So what is the Hare Psychopathy checklist? It is a psychological tool used to assess the presence of psychopathy in individuals. It is a 22-item checklist of perceived personality traits and observable behaviors. It is intended to be completed on the basis of a semi-structured interview along with a review of ancillary information. Simply put, it's a 22-question quiz answered by the psychologist that is ran against the person's current answers and their criminal history. Anyway, the list used for the purpose of gameplay consists of 9 of those descriptors and goes as follows: grandiose sense of self, need for stimulation, cunning and manipulative, lack of remorse or guilt, callousness and lack of empathy, poor behavioral controls, impulsivity and failure to accept responsibility, and criminal versatility. The game assumes that if you have a low empathy stat, you're more than likely to exhibit a few of those symptoms automatically, and that adding cyberware will exacerbate these symptoms, or even add a few more. You're also given an equation to kind of simplify things. Dissociation plus psychopathic tendencies equals cyberpsychosis. Or conversely, I'm a thing plus everybody else is a thing, so why not just kill anything that gets in my way? See, as a cyberpsycho, you aren't killing living, breathing people anymore. You're committing acts as simple as breaking down an Amazon box after a purchase. People are no longer people, just obstacles. The next 5 bullet points sum up pretty much everything from the start of the cyberpsychosis section on page 231 up through the opening paragraph in the effects of cyberpsychosis section on page 232, completely summing up that particular section. Now we can finally go through the rules, and funny enough, this is the shortest section of the video, though I do think it was moderately important that we understand what a cyberpsycho is and how humanity loss comes into play. On page 232, you are presented with a list of arrows under the rules of cyberpsychosis. It goes like this: if your empathy is 3 or greater, no cyberpsychosis or dissociative disorder. You can carry on role-playing your character as you please. No worries about any extra added roleplay. If your empathy is equal to 2, borderline dissociative disorder, do your best to roleplay accordingly. This can be hard to do if you're not familiar with the way dissociation works up to this point. Equal to 1, dissociative disorder, borderline cyberpsychosis. Character exhibits strongly at least 3 traits from the hair psychopathy checklist. Do your best to roleplay accordingly. This would mean picking traits from the hair psychopathy checklist that would best suit your character and incorporating them into the roleplay. For example, you could pick cunning and manipulative, lack of remorse of guilt, or criminal versatility for those 3 pieces. If your empathy is equal to 0, you have cyberpsychosis. Character exhibits strongly at least 5 traits from the hair psychopathy checklist. Do your best to roleplay accordingly. The same rules would apply from the last bullet point, only you would pick 5. Which 5 out of the 9 is pretty rough, so I mean you could look up the entire 22 item checklist and go from there as well. If your empathy is equal to 0 and you have negative humanity, you now have extreme cyberpsychosis. Your character is handed over to the GM, who plays them according to their worst tendencies. The character is handed back to the player if their humanity becomes a positive number again. Then in black text down below, violent cyberpsychos that become a danger to public safety are hunted down by a branch of law enforcement known as the Psycho Squad or C-SWAT. Death is a typical outcome. Capture and rehabilitation are rare. You might know the Psycho Squad or C-SWAT better as MaxTac, the cyberpsycho hit squad that only captures and rehabilitates the most vicious of cyberpsychos. The first one that comes to mind is Melissa Rory, the woman who got the faulty pair of mantis blades and ended up going cyberpsycho in Cyberpunk 2077. They drop off in aerodynes, put a bullet in somebody's head, and take off to file the necessary and adequate paperwork, which, if I'm being honest, is probably none. My suggestion when developing a character is probably to go ahead and take into account what kind of character traits they would exhibit if they were to go cyber psycho. That way, in the event that you end up losing enough humanity to go cyber psycho, you can at least get an idea of what it is your character would do or say or think in that regard. As role-playing a cyber psycho character without those thoughts, without those negative traits in mind would prove to be difficult. It would probably also be handy to go ahead and keep in mind that when building your character, you're also upgrading your very own Ship of Theseus. How much are you willing to take away and how much are you willing to upgrade before you can really call your character your character? Wow, this has really been fun to write. Initially I was going to write this back when discussing the actual rules of play, but a comment on the last video prompted me to play that video back. Why? Because I thought I had stated my line about cyberpsychosis in that video in such a way that it could have sounded like I had taken a ruling and tried to pass it off as my own idea. Listening to it back, I ended up not doing so, not stating it in that manner, but it was still stated too matter-of-fact for my liking, so I took it to the extreme and made a whole video breaking down cyberpsychosis. Because, you know, that's the normal human response. So, to the commenter on my last video, thank you, genuinely. It turns out releasing a whole video breaking down cyberpsychosis following a video on the medtech class flows a whole lot better than releasing it in a whole slew of rules. For now, I'm gonna close out, so thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving me a like and maybe your subscription. It really helps me out a lot. I love you all, and I will see you all later.